team in place. Michelle, tell us when we're online.
We select over here.
Uh-huh.
We appear on the screen.
Why? We're not on the screen out there, though. Well, what's up with that?
Okay, Michelle, are we online? Okay, good morning, everyone, and good morning to all our observers who are following us. We're day 4 of our 150th plenary of the IAASB. And today we have 3 topics for discussion. One, the maintenance of our ISA for LCE standard. Secondly, the approval of our experts narrow scope amendments. And thirdly, an update on some of our sustainability work. So we're going to turn it over to Jasper and Isabel right now to talk about the LCE standard, and that's agenda item 11.
Yeah, thank you, Tom, and good morning, everyone. The clicker is not working, so maybe Michelle, can you go to the next slides? So let me start with introducing the team. So on the team from a staff perspective on the ISFL LCE maintenance, it's myself and Isabel. Then we have 2 project board members, Greg and Hernan. And we've met with Greg and Hernan throughout this quarter. Actually 3 times, because yesterday we had our meeting as well, and the other 2 times we had virtually met. In addition, we also spoke this quarter with Kai Mortenhagen, so the former task force chair of the ISFL LCE project, to get his views on how to best set up the project proposal for maintenance of the ISFL LCE. If you can go to the next slide. And on the next slide is the purpose of the plenary session. So we had our first discussion on the maintenance of the ISFL LCE last year in June. You may recall that in Madrid, that was in the executive session. So Isabel and I started planning out for the first maintenance of the ISFL LCE project, and that would then incorporate the changes that we made to our fraud and going concern standards, but also for PI Track 2 and experts, those projects. And given that this will be repeated several times for future projects as well, we thought it was good to have a discussion here with the board on how to operationalize the maintenance of the ISFL LCE, because when going through this, we came up with several questions and you could take several directions, and that's why we scheduled this meeting with you today so we could talk and get your input. And that would then help us a lot because when we start drafting the project proposal, because we would like to discuss that with you and approve that as well in December of this year. So when we went through the process and had our discussions, we really looked on how to set up an efficient and effective process, and also consistency in execution, and lastly, transparency to our stakeholders. And stakeholders then includes the PIOB when we're reporting to them on whether we have followed the process. Before I go to the next slide, I just want to highlight that we also we received a letter from the S&P AG, which included content on the ISAF LCE. The S&P AG highlighted the importance of taking account that all challenges, that all changes to the ISAs should not be brought into the ISAF LCE. They highlighted the importance of the relevance and also proportionality to take these matters into account, which we also brought into our paper. The other thing, they did not agree with our decision in June last year on the timing of the maintenance. So they would prefer to have a periodic update to the ISAF LCE, while we agreed to update the ISA for LCE once an ISA project is being revised. When a project to revise the ISA is being concluded. Then the next one is a comment. They had a comment on the terminology. They asked us to be careful in considering how we use some of the terminology used in this paper, because they found that some of the wording may be ambiguous. So we also, of course, need to stay true what we agreed to in June, and also we included subsequently something on the maintenance in the first-time implementation guide. So we need to stay aligned with that wording as well. But we'll take that into account for future documents. Then lastly, they ask us to engage with them actively on the project proposal. So we will reach out to IFEC staff who deals with the S&P AG and to set up a meeting with them. If you can go to the next slide. This slide is basically recapping what we decided in June last year. Maybe to go a little bit of a step back, we gave a summary as well in our paper because I think it's important to see the whole picture here, and to go back to the exposure draft of the ISAF LCE, where we had a question on how we should maintain the standard. And as with a lot of topics on the ISAF LCE, there were very diverse views. So also on how to maintain it. So for example, on the basis for the maintenance, some respondents were of the view that it should be based on the ISAs. While others said, like, no, it should not be based on the ISAs because it's a separate standard. So you should do separate information gathering and based on that, update the ISAF LCE. On the timing, also very diverse views. Some said like it should be a stable platform, so you shouldn't make any regular changes to it, or maybe periodically. Were some saying that, and then that period that could also significant change, like the period, the views on that, what the period should be. There were also different views on that. And where another large group as well, and that's where we landed, is update the ISA for LCE when an ISA project is almost finalized. So where did we land with everything? So on the basis for the maintenance, we worked in June last year. We agreed to do that based on the new or the revised ISA. So for example, right now in this case, when the fraud standard is finalized, we would base the revisions on the ISA for LCE on that based on the changes that were made to the fraud standard. So here there are some benefits because we benefit from the experience gained during the development of the ISA. The issues and the actions and the solutions to these issues were already developed by the project team, so we can just focus on for the ISA for LCE, we can just focus on the relevance and proportionality. It also promotes alignment. So that's another advantage that there is for this approach. On the timeline, so here we agreed to start the maintenance of the ISA for LCE when the ISA project is almost finalized. This is this relatively helps us, is more an efficient approach, because all the issues have been discussed and solutions have been developed, like we don't need to go through that same process again. It also avoids redebating issues. So therefore you can also, you have a reduced timeline. You can go through this relatively quickly. So the effect would that there would be a limited time gap between the effective date of the ISA and the underlying ISA and then the ISA of LC, about a time gap of about 1 year. So that's all set out in the paper, but we thought, given that we have the rest of this session builds on this decision that we've made, and it was made in the executive session, thought we would be good to ask the board to reconfirm this decision. And that's on the next slide. Just with that, Tom, hand it over to you.
Okay. Any comments? Wendy?
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Asper, and your team. I think you did a great job on these papers, and okay, better. And I continue to agree with the approach we discussed at the June meeting, and so now we're saying it on the record, which is option 2, starting the maintenance of the ISA for LCE when the revision to the ISA is almost finalized. You know, there's a little bit of a concern about the lag. However, I think the benefit and the efficiency of doing it in accordance with option 2 outweighs it. And I don't think I heard these words in your presentation, but the objective, and this comes to mind when the SMPAG says, okay, not everything needs to go in, the objective is reasonable assurance. So there needs to be a consideration for every time there's a new ISA in an appropriate timeline. Is an adjustment needed to the LCE standard to continue to have it be reasonable assurance? Thank you.
Bill?
Let me just check. Was that Bill? Good, thank you. Just a point that might relate to later discussion as well, Jasper, is that when we set an ISA, we take into account proportionate and try and make it scalable and proportionate. So the thinking is done at the same time and should be collected at the same time. And therefore, I agree with your idea of just prior to release of the completion of the ISA is the time to start. So I just made that comment so that we don't lose track, and whether that impacts us a little bit in how we word EDs or other matters related to the ISA, but it's not like they're two completely different exercises, and that issue can't be lost.
You wanted to follow on that, Nancy?
Thank you, Tom. So I have the same thought as Bill. And I thought, you know, you're going to be thinking about scalability anyway. So this is not the plan itself. The plan's great. I support it. But as you are going down the track of looking at either developing or revising an ISA, one of the steps is going to be, you're going to be considering scalability. So use that occasion to think about what might be the possible implications for ISA for LCEs, and just make note. You don't have to do very much about it, but capture the thoughts then, right? And then the other thing is, as you release an ED on the revisions or the new standard, add in something about, you know, that build on that scalability aspect and collect input. So all of that is just to keep information. And as you go into the maintenance project, you can go back in and draw out from that. So it doesn't detract you from the path of looking at the revising or developing ISA, but use that opportunity to collect information for the maintenance project. Thank you.
I think we need to be careful, though, about confusing the related, but not 100% exactly the same. They're not synonyms. Scalability and proportionality here, though. Scalability, in my mind, refers to the standard applies to different circumstances within a particular audit engagement. Proportionality we think about in terms of how it relates to the entities and the specific circumstances of that entity. And so while they're highly correlated, They're not the same, and I think it's really important that when we're consulting on ISIS, yes, of course, we could use that information to inform the LCE work, and we'll get some intelligence. But we're consulting on the ISA, and then we'll draw upon, and this is something that I want to keep this simple. Like what we're trying to do with the maintenance project is do the minimum amount of changes in the ISA for LCE standard to reflect changes in the ISAs in a proportionate way. And I think that drives, in fact, what we will do in the project proposal, because we're not redeliberating the purpose of the ISAs. That we've agreed, like that is done. And so we should really be very limited in terms of the maintenance effort as it reads for LCE. And in fact, every project proposal is the exact same. We refer to what we did in the ISAs and then reflect it through. I know we'll have a little bit more of that discussion later, but I do fear that we're mixing some concepts here that we should be pretty precise about. Edo?
Thank you, Tom. It's going to be somewhat in line with our earlier session, but I do not agree with this approach at all. I think it's for the arguments that some of them that Jasper made, it makes much more sense that every individual project considers the consequences for the LCE standard at the very same time. It reduces it because we have a due care process around that, and we can leverage that rather than to put new projects on every single time, where this also results in a delay of significant concepts that we may be introducing for the ISAs in the LCE standard. So if we think of if significant concepts are introduced in the ISAs, the ISA for LCE will not have those for at least a year. But what does that do to the perception whether or not that is an inferior standard compared to the ISA? So I don't think it reflects well on the ISA for LCE. And I think significant concepts need to be introduced at the very same time for both ISA for LCE and the full standards. So I'm not on board with this at all. And I think it should just be roped into the individual projects with a view to both the ISAs, and you can include this in the project proposals for the big projects into the exposure draft, just like their conforming amendments. The same would go for the LCE. Thank you.
So, okay, we're going to have a similar debate as we had in the June meeting, because I can tell you I'm on the total opposite side of the spectrum on that point, because I think we've learned from other experience, if we're constantly updating the LCE standard, it will reduce its the ability to get people to adopt it. I just don't think that's what we're seeking. And in the world for IFRS for SMEs, the IFRSs are updated, and then there's a lag in the update of the SME standard too. I think we're overstating the devaluation of the LCE standard in this process. Now, that's my point of view, but this is the discussion we had last time, and the board sort of landed where it did, but I'd want to hear others' takes on it. Amaro.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I was about to bring the points you made in your intervention before. I think, although hearing Edo and respecting very much his perspective on this, really makes me think about. But my previous experience shows that if we have a specific standard for LCEs that we understand should not follow all aspects of ISAs in general, and we decided to have it, I think it's much more reasonable and effective for us to do from time to time the update, and benefiting of all the discussions we had when updating the ISA. So I still support the proposals and the decision we take before.
Lots of views on this, which is perfectly good. Hernan, I haven't heard from you yet.
Thank you, Tom. My reflection on this point is I agree that maybe collecting information during the discussion of ISA's full could be a good point for start our discussion or our reasonings about the needs to change the ISA for a C. But in our experience, I think those who comment the project affecting the full ISAs are not thinking in LC environment when respond our consultation, and that could create a problem to obtain the real input that we need to change and to update the ISA for LC. That's why I fully support our decision that we made in Shan the last year, because it could be seen as an opportunity to reconfirm that we could hear during our discussion the full ISAs is really what auditors of LCs are thinking about when we try to update this standard.
Shayu?
Thank you, Tom. So, as a new member, I was not in last June's discussion. So, I mean, the discussion was very informative and helpful. So, I also have some concern on the 1 year difference in effective date, but now I kind of get some thoughts into that. Why was that decision made? But I think from from practitioners' perspective, audit of LCE is not only performed by SMP, but by all the practitioners. So practically for a firm who decided to adopt both ISA and the ISO for LCE, that would mean that the 1 year difference would mean the firm will need to maintain 2 sets of methodology and everything, and for its practitioners to, execute both. And also from regulators' perspective, when they inspect or challenge your audit quality, they are also using two sets of standard. Well, you will argue it's only 1 year timing difference, but for those significant new standard or revisions, it makes a lot of difference. So on that point, I would agree with Edo, because my initial thoughts is it's almost like a conforming change, because for LCE, we are not setting a different standard. We are basically taken what's applicable from the ISAs. And a side thinking is that if that decision remains unchanged, when a significant new ISA or revision comes up, is a firm allowed to voluntarily option to say early adopt those piece of new ISA and the revision into their audit of LCE? Thank you.
Greg?
Thanks, Tom. So I think implicit in our June last year discussion was that we're taking a two-step approach to this, recognizing that the ISA for LCE is a separate product. It's designed for a specific purpose to make it easier for auditors of smaller entities to just go somewhere other than the full suite of ISAs and to be able to get the nub of what they need to do. So we're designing a separate thing from the ISAs. So whilst we can certainly gather, and I think the intention always was to gather whatever information we can as part of the overall ISA project process. So we're out consulting on an ISA. Let's get anything we can about the LCE lens. I think there was always a thought we would have to, given this is a separate product needing separate consideration, we would always have to do that second step, which is then drill in specifically thinking with an ISA for LCE lens, because the practitioners who are likely to respond, or the respondents who are likely to respond, are going to be more interested in that granularity of the second step. I think they might well engage twice if they're really interested as respondents in our ED, but I suspect, and we always thought once we said, well, okay, here's a change in the ISAs. Now, what does it mean for ISA for LCE? And we actually really thought hard about the changes that would flow down to the ISA for LCE, or even if a change was needed. That's the moment that they're really going to get engaged. So they'll be generally interested and a bit engaged, I think, in the first ISA process, but they should be particularly engaged in the second step. So I think we've got to recognise there's two products, probably two different audiences. We're going to get two separate lots of responses. To try and fold it all into the first one, to have done all that deep thinking about the ISA for LCE, I think we will, Tom, confuse what we're trying to do. We're going to be doing two things at once. I really encourage us to stay with, which I think our approach, which I think we've already communicated, Jesper, is what you're whispering to me, implementation guidance. I think it's already out there as to the approach. So, yeah, I worry that if we're going to backtrack on this at this point, because we've been trying to implement the decision of June last year.
Okay, when we approved the point of view in June of last year, we did not have unanimity around the table. We had strong, different countervailing views, but on balance, we thought our decision was correct. Remember, I get in the idea that we're hearing some practitioner point of view at the table, but we basically heard from the SMPAG that reflects a range of practitioner points of view, which clearly was in general supporting the 2024 decision in terms of the two-step approach that, right? So we would have to consider that. And I guess if we want to open this up, then there's implications to all of that. But Wendy, then Bill, then Neil.
I think that's just. She's waving at me.
Okay, the other tents have been up for some time. Wendy?
Thank you, Tom. You did say Wendy, even though there was some chatter.
I'd just like to say.
Bob Bell.
So I just want to add that while emotionally, I do agree with Edo 100% when we talked about it in June and when I revisited it for this project, practically it does not make sense. And so I had to balance for myself that I think we will get a better response and have a better updating process if we stick with option 2. I am sensitive that, I'm thinking about the exposure draft response that we normally do and the time that it takes for one ISA, that getting down to the last question of how is this going to impact LCE is not going to get the attention from that same group that it deserves. So on balance, I do have a concern with the delayed 1 year, but the truth of the matter is 1 year isn't a lot, and we can put early adoption as permitted. So I believe we should stick with 2.
Bill?
I have a lot of empathy for what Edo said, and bear in mind the 2024 discussion. Just trying to mediate or reach a compromise or whatever. I do think, and look, I've been a proponent of simplicity of processes along the way, so this is consistent with that view I've taken, is that I think 80% of the gathering of information for the LCE specifics will happen in the when we're doing the ISA, but I think Greg explained it particularly well. There will be an element of specificity to LCE that we don't want to complicate the ISA development, and we do need to address it at a later stage. But if you can understand that we really are doing the lion's share of the work when we're doing the ISA, and I think that's how it's how I've got my own compromise in my own mind.
Neil?
Thank you, Tom. So, I mean, I hear the view. My view is probably not as firm as it has to be done this way. I'd probably favor some simultaneous development, but regardless of the approach that we take, what I think I need to make sure that we do achieve is that the ISAs themselves need to be scalable. And if we have the LCE process incorporated as part of that, it really does force us to consider the scalability of the ISA itself. If we don't, we're then going to say, don't worry about scalability. We'll deal with that with the LCEs, and we may lose the opportunity to truly have the ISA, which needs to be scalable across a broad range considered robustly. So I would worry that we don't have scalability fully debated when we have the ISA change considered. I then want to make sure that, again, regardless of the approach, we don't end up with an inconsistency in the ultimate outcome. And some of that inconsistency might arise because we haven't truly debated the scalability of the standard. So we do need to make sure that we don't end up with inconsistencies. I'm less concerned about the timeline with a 1-year lag, but I wouldn't want to re-debate principles, requirements that have been agreed. So the LCE and the ISAs are currently closely aligned. When I put my hat on from a firm development point of view, I would expect that the firm is going to be looking at an ISA requirement, and they would process it through their methodology and workflows for the LCE solution at the same time. So I think there was a point earlier, as long as we make sure that the ISA change could be early adopted into an LCE solution, that would then mean that a methodology and system development process could apply both together. The last thing that I'd encourage is that if we are going to run these processes separately, we need the team itself to be integrated the same, etc. The last thing we need is a new team, and we can't maintain sort of perfect teams from one project to the next. But the last thing we want is a new team to pick up and re-debate the same topics. So getting that integration or getting the same team to deal with the project later would be really important to iron out the consistencies and not re-deliberate things that have been agreed.
Yes.
And maybe to clarify a little bit, some of the points has been raised. At least, like I hear the concerns about redebating. Like in the ISA for LCE, when you are working on that, you will not be redebating the issues. You will take the outcome as is from the ISA project, and from there you would go and look at the proportionality. Well, first of all, you look like is it relevant? Like for example, if you with fraud, if you key out matters related to fraud that is not relevant for an ISA for LCE, so you can take those out. Then you go and then you look at whether the changes were made to the fraud standard, how to bring those in a proportionate manner in the ISA for LCE. So it would not be redebating issues at all. On the scalability point, I think it's important to highlight that you still have to look at that. We still have to look at that from an ISA perspective, because not all jurisdictions have adopted the ISA for LCE. So it is as important as it is to look at when you're working on the ISA project, to look at scalability and proportionality as well. Okay, I do like the idea that throughout this ISA project, you can think about certain, already start gathering some information on that you can then later use for the ISA for LCE project. Maybe one other thing, Tom. The other thing is on the team who's working on it, like to maintain the ISA for LCE in a certain way of how it's been set up, there are very specific design principles to it. Like that also needs to be looked at by some board members or some staff, I think, so that you're not getting suddenly working on one project and adds like huge slabs of text in the ISA for LCE. So that we, as a board, we also need to think about that we make sure that the design of the ISA for LCE and the design principles are also consistently applied.
So one other thing, I agree everything, yes, what you're saying, but we've talked a little bit about methodology and be developed simultaneous. There will be audit firms who only use ISA for LCE standards. And the debate on the ISAs themselves will not be particularly relevant as well. And that will occur at SMPs in jurisdictions that have adopted ISA for LCE. So like, I just want us to remember that that's also a context that we should take. And so, I think it's really important. Let me turn to Vili, then Hernan, and then Nancy.
Thank you, Tom. I think here we are this. Sorry?
I said,
Nancy,
sorry.
please pay attention.
I said Vili, then Hernan, then Nancy. I'm trying to preview people because there's lots of heads up, but maybe I should not mention anyone's name so they don't get it in their head.
Tom, just a little bit to what Jasper said. I think the point that Neil made in terms of the ISAs being continue to being scalable and proportionate is absolutely right. And this board needs to be disciplined in that way because that is all part and parcel of the ISAs. Remember, we can please and we need to be alert to that. If we ever in the debate of an ISA say, no, we don't need to look at this because the ISA for LCE will look at this, then we're going down the wrong path. The ISA needs to be developed completely in accordance with our design principles of an ISA, which includes scalability and proportionality. Remember, we always say the ISA for LCE is a separate proportionality solution. It's not there to replace the ISAs in any way. The other thing, it was interesting when we had a discussion with the JSS in May, the Nordic Federation made a presentation to us, and obviously they have adopted the ISA for LCE. And the important thing there is, because it's two products, you have to get away from the mindset you're not applying the ISA for LCE relative to the ISAs. That is your standard. As it is at a particular point in time, you pick it up, you go and do your audit, you achieve reasonable assurance, you issue your report, and you move on. It's not being applied relative to anything else. It's a product on its own. And therefore, the effective date should also not be that big of a concern.
Hernan now. And I'll say no one else's name.
Thank you, Tom. Well, I think we are here two different problems, and maybe there are no single way to solve this problem, because on one hand we have firms applying both set of standards and they prioritize the methodology and the uniform of practice, and on the other hand we have firms that just apply the LCE standard. I remember that when the ISA for LCE was developed, the focus was on those second group, those firms applying just the LCE standard, because they are the first audit providers to the LCEs. I believe that if we are trying to keep close to our first intention when the ISA for LCE was developed, maybe we need to go back to the foundations of the standard and see that we need to reconfirm with our main audience about any change we want to do, because the risk is changing the LCE standard with the update of those applying both sets of standards. I believe that maybe it's not the better solution for all parties, but is closer to our original intention was when the ISA policy was issued. Thank you.
Nancy.
Thank you, Tom. So I too wasn't here back in June, so I did not benefit from the discussion and the debate around the table here. A couple of thoughts. So when I look at this, I'm in the camp of supporting the current approach. I do see ISA for LCE as a separate product, and I think listening to Greg, I'm there. We are going to be collecting, and to Bill's point, we're going to be collecting information on scalability and looking at proportionality while we're doing the main ISA to start out with. At that juncture, I wonder if we can have some flexibility with our maintenance methodology to allow for one-offs. If it is such a significant change, we view that there would be a real divergence between the two sets of standards, then whether there's room to trigger off doing an earlier maintenance on that one specific ISER. So just toss out an option to think about. But the general rule would be what we have in our plan and do it periodically and do the 1-year lag. Ultimately, I imagine the firms will be able to find solutions around how they would deal with the two sets of standards if there are some differences in the margin. And I have confidence in our professional colleagues that they be able to contain that. Thank you.
Okay. I think everyone who's wanted to say their piece has said it. I still think when I listen to the majority of the room, most people are with some flavors in support of the June 2024 position. But if people have a different, I guess I could survey the room to see if we're different. Ado, I know you're clearly don't support it. And you've made the same point when we did it, which is fine. We noted it for the record. And Ajay, you may have been similar position, but any other people who are seeking a change in that position at the board? There's a little bit of questions, which is the rest of this paper about how we execute now on it. Which is, we sort of had a little bit of that discussion here, is like, how limited are we going to be? How are you doing? I think we're going to learn stuff through the ISA process anyway. We're not going to forget it, but I think we need to be realistic. The staff teams and the board teams, as they're drafting the standard, it's quite chaotic towards the end. Like, they have a lot that they're handling. So they thinking about drafting revisions to an LCE standard that is in a quite different style and is set up differently, probably is a lot to ask. So like, yeah, clearly you don't forget the knowledge, and the knowledge will be intentional. But I think the question is how we execute on our decision. I do want to say, though, just how this standard's going to be adopted should be taken into account. There are some jurisdictions, and I know it's New Zealand, I'm looking across the way, who has a pretty sophisticated and well-resourced standard setting process that can make changes more rapidly. But there are a lot of jurisdictions that are adopting this as a core standard that have an emerging profession that won't be able to make changes. And we should be aware of that. And that's partly why I talk about hesitancy about being okay. Like, people are getting reasonable decision on our standards pre-ISO 240 revised being put in place. We just think that it's going to be better once we have ISO 240 revised in place when it's effective. Like that, yet we're still given reasonable assurance opinion. So I think we should be careful about this distinction we make sometimes, but okay, so what the record will note is that there are still differences, points of view on it, some concerns that we should take account of and try to mitigate, but most of the board still supports the June 24 approach. Is that fair? Okay, now we go to that was supposed to be the easy part, Jasper. So maybe this will be the easy part, since we did get some of the other issues on the table.
Okay, so now we're gonna move on from that decision to the framework that we are proposing to guide the team to execute the decision that was made. Okay, so initially we didn't have in our plan to actually create a framework for the maintenance of LC, but when we were discussing amongst each other with the project board members, it became evident that having a set guidelines that will provide clarity of the team and for the board as well on what is the maintenance of the ISAFRLC, what does that entail, how do we do the work, has really clear benefits. So we, when we made the decision that we were going to develop the framework, we did look at the framework for activities that the IAASB have and it's available publicly, and see if we can make it fit there. And although there are some, like the framework for activities is great, it does have a lot of information for the new or revised ISA. There are some specificities for the revision of the ISA for LC that does not quite fit under the components that are there. So we thought that developing a complement to the framework, so something that goes along with it, is a good idea. So the framework will include some of the information that you will normally see in the purpose description, but also a little bit more detail on how to proceed with the revisions for the ISA for LC. So what is the starting point? The starting point is the revisions for the ISA, and how do we then implement or introduce the proportionality? How do we look at the design principles that were made when we first designed drafted the ISAFRLC? So how to incorporate that into the solution. So that's a bit of the background for the framework. So wanted to have the board's view on the framework itself. So Tom, I can pass it back to you.
Okay. Any comments on questions 2 and 3? Josephine.
Probably it's not really more of a question, really. The framework for maintaining ISAFRLC, the way it's pitched, it suggests that it's completely separate from our whole framework for activities, and that to me doesn't feel right. And maybe it's just the way it's been articulated, and I just want to make sure that we still mean that it's within our overarching framework. Okay, I see nodding. Thank you.
It's about executing the LCE. Okay. Wendy?
I was a little confused by that as well. It's about how we execute it for LCE in a scalable way or scale to LCE, right? Because my only comment is let's not make it overly complex. Let's make it proportional. I don't know which words to use. Proportional to the LCE standard, and not overcomplicate it. That was my only comment. And so you clarified that this is the overall framework, right? So I'm still a little confused on how we're going to have a sideline to that overall framework. But my response to that is, if we have a principled framework, it should just bring it down to how you apply it to this particular LCE standard, which is standalone.
Billy?
Yeah, and I could see people, maybe the term framework is what's stripping people up, because you're quite right, Isabel confirmed it as well. The idea wasn't to create something separate. It's still within our framework for activities. It's still a full due process project. We're going to apply to the public interest framework, all of those things. Would it help people if we simply say that this is the IAASB's overarching approach to maintaining the ISA for LCE? Because then that's the overarching approach, and then we will have individual maintenance project proposals.
Which I think is the way the paper is going. But when I clicked into the framework from the paper, I got confused.
Yeah, really, that would be great, because I had the same issue. I felt like, and of course it sent all the hairs running when I went on outreach on this. It did feel like we were now going to create a whole new thing. So yeah, that would be a much better way of articulating it. Thank you.
Greg?
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I'm happy with the relabeling of what it is. I think the key thing was just to really separate the consideration of what are the rules of the road here, what's our approach to this, which we want to revisit every now and then, and then we want to apply it, to maybe on an annual basis or maybe slightly more often or less often going forward, but to separate the two things so we don't re-debate the approach as we maybe just did. Thanks.
Another way to think of it is like you effectively have an overarching project proposal that's always open, and then for each time we do the maintenance, we slide in what is necessary. Like, I honestly think we should be careful about constantly having to do the bureaucratic approach of like creating formal project proposals for this. We have agreed now as a board that we need to maintain these standards to keep the principles consistent in a proportionate manner for a typical LCE. And so it's almost like it's an open project proposal with specific standards ultimately going to be addressed, parts of the standard addressed underneath, right? Let's try to keep it, I think, Wendy, your point is let's keep this as simple as possible. The term framework in and of itself implies something big, but it's not as big as what the team really intends it to be. It's just sort of guiding principles almost of how they're going to go about their work. Amar?
Just for the sake of clarity, I do agree anyway. But in paragraph 32, I will read just to facilitate. The section will explain that the effective date of the revision of the ISA for LCE will generally be a year after the effective date of the revision of the ISAs. I think it's wrong. I think it's after the effective date of the revised ISA. Because if you go to example in the appendix 2, is exactly what is portrayed there. I think instead of the revision, and of the revision is effective date of the revised.
Okay. Billy, did you have your 10 up for me? Okay, so general support, but a little modification about terminology and how we phrase it. And that, it did in just a second. I think when you twisted it, it was the magic touch. Lit up, but it's not working.
It's working now.
Tom, could we add this to the technology project? The functionality of the meeting room?
Yes, but I've declared you're the project board member of that, so. Touche.
Okay, apologize for that. Okay, so we are talking about now the objective. So the next thing that we did as a team is trying to draft the project proposal for the current revisions that we are looking at. So the fraud going concern, PI, and a narrow scope amendments. And then one of the first section that you have to think about when you do your project proposal is what are the objectives? What are we trying to achieve? And then we had different views as a team, as with the project board members as well. So we thought that we were going to bring the options to the board as well. So the first option, or the first thing that we were thinking about is, okay, so the objective is really to align in a proportionate way the ISA for LC to the ISAs. So as we discussed just before. We do believe that this remains important, and it does provide it's a simple, effective way of letting people know what we're doing. We're aligning the ISA for LC to the ISAs. However, it does not provide a lot of specificities or what actually we are going to revise in this particular maintenance. So we were thinking about the second option with the project objective, that listing the actual project objective of what we're trying to address in this particular revisions. Now we know what the objective should will be, or we have a starting point, I should say, with the underlying or the relevant ISAP project. So if we are looking at bringing the fraud recent revision into the ISAP for LCE, we can be looking at the project objective from the fraud project and see which one are relevant. Most likely, most of them, they should be we'll bring that into the project proposal, and that will provide transparency to stakeholder what we are actually trying to achieve with this particular revision. So the project team was leaning towards option 2, but happy to, okay, so that was one thing that we were looking at. The next thing, I don't know where I put okay. The next thing that we were looking at too is the issues and actions. So similarly, we're thinking, okay, what do we want to bring, or what should we list in the project proposal in terms of the public interest issues? Again, because we have a starting point, which is the relevant ISAP project, we will be able to look at the public interest issues that were listed in the project proposal and identifies the one that are relevant in the context of an audit of an LCE, potentially change, customizing the word to make sure that they are reflecting the circumstances of the ISAP for LCE, and including those into the project proposal. The actions are a little bit different because if you look at the project proposal for the ISAP project, you will see some actions which will be explore or consider introducing requirements and all that. But those, because we're starting a bit later for the ISAP for LCE maintenance, the solution would have been developed. So we were thinking our starting point for the action is not what is included in the project proposal of the ISAP of the relevant ISAP project, but really the starting point for the action is the solution that have been developed and debated with the board. So, and then what we have to do as when we do the revision is really looking at the solution, making sure to bring the proportionality into it, and then determine if it's still achieve the project objective or achieve the reasonable assurance. So those were the section that we wanted to bring up to the attention of the board, and then looking for your feedback on those.
Okay, any comments? Mara?
I agree very much with option 2, because for the sake of clarity, I think it's important for us to be very clear with what we purport to achieve. And particularly, I would call the attention, I do agree as well with the observation made in paragraph 40. We do not intend to rediscuss what was decided. So it's very important to be very clear that what we intend to achieve is really incorporate what was already decided and debated, or debated and decided into the LCE. So even here in paragraph 40, I would not even just talk about solutions discussed, but what was agreed directly.
Wendy?
Thank you, Tom. So I don't really have anything for 5 and 6. I was okay with what was proposed, but I thought for question 4, I actually preferred option 1. It would keep it simple and allow for more flexibility. Just sticking with, efficiency and time. And I do have a question though. If we go with option 1, do you have the flexibility to add more to it, or must you always keep it simple? So that's why when I use the word flexibility, I thought option 1 was better.
Shaya?
Thank you, Tom. When I read option 1 and 2, I think they are not comparable. They are talking about different things. I would prefer that actually option 1 is the real objective of the maintenance project, While option 2 are really talking about how do you assess or incorporate or align with a specific ISA. So I would also prefer option 1 because option 2 is just not a maintenance objectives. They are talking about the subject matter of your maintenance, or you could do a combination. But I think option 1 looks better. Thank you.
Bill?
I don't want option 1 and 2 to be seen as binary. I agree with where Wendy was coming from. Keep it simple, and I heard those words come from you as well, Tom. So, yeah, what I'd be wanting option 1, but the basic point is we've done most of the work during the development of the ISA. So maybe it's just how the words are used. I mean, for example, one of the things you say is that proposed actions as included in the project proposal. The solutions discussed and agreed rather than rethinking it through. So I think that's the point I'm trying to get to, is that let's keep this simple along the way and as a marginal exercise rather than a more complete exercise.
Okay.
Tom, the project team discussed option 1 is really the overarching objective, which really sits in the overarching approach document, because that is ultimately what we're trying to do here, which is, the alignment and all of that stuff. But then we thought, well, yes, that's fine for up there, but actually, so we need both. We need one sitting up in that overarching document, and then we think as a project team, we then need to be a bit more specific when we get down to individual updates. So that's when we thought option 2 kicked in. So it's not really either, even though they're presented here as options. I think the way the discussion has developed with the overarching approach, as you're calling it, Billy, I think that's where that flavour has to be in there, because that's ultimately what the approach is trying to deliver. So, yeah.
Right. That's the objective of any revision of the LCE standard is option 1, effectively. The question is, what do we do? How are we going to determine what's right in terms of what's revised based upon what changed in ISAs? Yes, bro.
And we had some discussions as well, like within the staff team, and it's and with Willy there as well. So you could almost say, why are we revising the ISAs, right? There's also you cannot put an overarching label to why we're revising the ISAs. And the same, so that like Willy and I had a conversation about it, and he said, like, for example, that support the consistent performance of quality audit engagements. So that would be true for every ISA revision, and we're not putting that as the objective for every ISA revision. So therefore, I could see like a hybrid approach that you would still refer to this overarching one, but you still include the more detailed ones as well, because when your objective when revising the ISFLC, for example, for fraud, would be similar to the objectives that we would have in the ISA project proposal.
I guess my slight worry about option 2 to begin with is, like, I don't want to read deliberation of the project objectives of the original ISA. Like, one of my thoughts was, in a more hybrid approach along, it's like, state what it was. And, like, as a matter of fact, when we in the project, whatever we're going to do in terms of the revisions for the specific project that ISA that's been updated, and say what the key changes were, and then we have a way to filter those changes through. But I feel like we oftentimes really get bogged down on the details of a project proposal, when in fact what we're trying to do here is relatively simple, which is find that how do we make sure that the ISA for LCE remains consistent with the principles of the revised ISA in a proportionate manner. And so, like, a lot of the debate of, like, oh, well, you need this project objective, it needs to be tweaked. I feel like we may create a more complex effort than is actually needed. So I guess we're talking about a hybrid model where one is overarching for everything, and then for each project, you know, you could state what the project objectives were, what the key changes were to do it, and then there has to be some filtering for the LCE standard. Is that's what I'm hearing around the table, right? Okay. Is that helpful to you or not so helpful? But I think that's the board's direction. I think as much as possible, we should keep it simple. Because I'm pretty clear that we all, whether we agree that it should be done simultaneously with the ISAs or after the fact, we all just want to make sure that the principles remain consistent.
Okay, then we go to the next round. So that will be the presentation of the maintenance project proposal. Here again, we're looking at this. We looked at really at these options. Okay, which of these options have transparency, and also what is an efficient and effective process. So for us to continue doing this for the several maintenance projects that are coming our way at one point. So we had 3 options, but I already caveat here that there are way more options. So like maybe see if we can beat all the definitions of risk response with options 4, 5, and 6. So there are different. There are many different options, but we thought these 3 were at least in discussing and also playing around with it. These were the most viable ones. So option 1 would basically be project proposal as any other that we've seen. Like from that perspective, keeps it simple. So the look and feel would be exactly the same. The second one would be also to have a completely separate project proposal, but have references to the ISA project proposal. So for example, for your objective, you would have a reference to your CD ISA project proposal. I will go through option 1 and 2 in the next slide in a little bit more detail, so you can maybe better visualize how it looks. Then the third one would to build in the revision for the ISA, that project proposal would build in already the project proposal for the ISA LCE. So you would have only one project proposal that will deal with the ISA revision and with the revision of the ISA for LCE. So here's a little bit of a comparison between option 1 and option 2. On the left-hand side, you see the different sections that you recognize from a project proposal, and then comparison how we think this could look like in under option 1 and 2. And here again, you can go to different options because like what you would exactly include under option 2 with a reference or not, that there already you can make different decisions. So going through it, like we would envision under option 1 that you would just have you provide some background on the ISA revision, plus then also some general background on why we are revising the ISA for LCE. With option 2, you would just have a direct reference to. You would still explain the reasons for the maintenance of the ISA for LCE, but you would have for the rest, for the background on the ISA revision, you would have a reference to the ISA project proposal. For the objectives, like where we landed now, you would go for option 1, which we just discussed. For option 2, you can just again for the objectives reference to the ISA project proposal, and then explain if you want to make changes and the rationale for that. The stakeholder need, it gets a little bit of a repetitive story, but like you would, so maybe I'm not going through all of them, but you would generally would be idea to on option 2 to leverage as much as possible of the ISA project proposal and include references to that. Areas where in our view you cannot do that is the timeline and resources and the output and impact, because I think those 2 things would be completely specific to the ISA for LCE, the revision of the maintenance of the ISA for LCE. So like if you're just comparing the options, if I compare option 1 and 2 to these overarching characteristics that we looked at, so the efficiency and effectiveness and the transparency. Look, I think it's not that much more work option 1 than option 2. If you look at option 1, like it's a lot of the things will be fairly standard and doesn't take as much time. Well, option 2, you still need to explain some of the changes. So like that is, I think there's not a big difference, but for transparency, I think there is. You can go to one project proposal where all the information is included. So also when we report to the PIOB, we can point it at one project proposal. Option 2, you also need to think about that you would have references if like a maintenance project includes several revisions to ISA. So for example, in this case, to fraud, going concern, expert, and PI, you would need to have 4 references to each of these underlying ISA revisions. So it's not as transparent as you think it would be. If you just think about one project, yes, then you can do it. But as soon as you start to group different revisions, it start to get quite messy. So that's why we prefer option 1 over option 2. If you go to option 3, you run into the similar issue where, like, what if you have several ISA revisions that are being incorporated in the ISA for LCE maintenance? You need to go to different places. How if you would report to the PIOB where the due process is followed, it's getting quite complex, and I think it's also not really transparent for our stakeholders. So that is why we in the end landed on option 1. But I do recognize, Tom, you were just mentioning an overarching project proposal with amendments, which we also explored. But in the end, I think most of the discussions that we have as a board on a project proposal are around objectives and the scope section, and those you would anyway still need to do. So it was one of the things we started playing around with, but also then the project proposal would always stay open. So how do you then deal with due process? Those were some practical things, but again, I said there are many more options, and I'm probably sure the board will come up with others as well. So interested in your thoughts and the discussion on this.
So I guess I definitely am a little confused by this. Even under option 1, say, obviously the first batch we're dealing with maybe 2 or 3 standards, but even option 1, every time we do a maintenance, we'd have to actually write a project proposal that says the exact same thing, that we're trying to make these standards proportionate for the facts and circumstances of the LCE. If we're going to always do that, the project proposal could be quite simple, that we're committed to doing that. And can't we as a board just agree that that is our commitment? And then once we get to specific standards, whether it's ISA 240, 570, or in the future it's going to be 500 and 330, we set out in the first agenda paper for that topic about what our approach is to that. I just feel like the risk is that we get bogged down in the process of creating a project proposal when we all know that the goal is to have a proportionate response for it. And then it's just a question of what's relevant and what's not. And that's actually a technical detail. Do others feel the same way?
Yes, completely, and thank you. And so in terms of my response to this, I agree with Tom's proposal because we're just overbaking something that's unnecessary in the circumstances, and it just takes up resource that we should really be applying to other more important things. So yeah.
Ada?
Thank you, Tom. So I think with the board's decision on not bringing the ISA for LCE elements into the individual ISA project developments, that sails away option 3, which inherently would be, I think, most efficient. So I can see option 3 not fitting with the board's direction on the first question. But I'm with you. Well, if that is the case, it is only an update for what the board's already decided in the context of the ISAs. Keep it as simple as possible. Don't over-engineer this because it doesn't serve I don't see it serving a meaningful purpose. Thank you.
And then Wendy?
Yeah, and we may be suffering here from the fact that we're talking about this very conceptually, and maybe it would work well if we now do the first project proposal. I think we're all comfortable with an overarching approach that sort of sets out, this is our overarching approach. So what we're really thinking about here is, so when we get to December, we're going to have maintenance, because this will be a continuous process. So we will have maintenance project proposal 1, fraud, going concern, and experts, because that's what's going to be addressed there. And really all we need is we want to make sure all the elements of a project proposal will still be there. You will, and I'm talking about, you know, the subject could be one sentence. The introduction could be referred to the overarching framework. The objectives will be, as Thomas stated, we will say, apart from the overarching objective, we will say, we will factually state, these were the objectives of the ISA projects. These, for example, the one that was in the paper on the fraud project, that was a project objective. It is not relevant for this project. You know, you will show the adjustment. You will have a short timeline and you will have a paragraph on the resources. So I don't think the way it's going to be, where it's going to look, is going to be that overwhelming. It is going to be, and that's going to be project maintenance project proposal 1. The next one is going to be maintenance project proposal 2, audit evidence and risk response, external confirmations and inventory, because those will probably be grouped together when we update the ISA for LCE. And that's all, that's really all it's going to be.
Wendy?
I don't think I have to say anything more than I fully agree with what the three of you just said. Thank you.
Okay. Jasper?
And Tom, maybe it is to Willy's point, like in because we, like Isabel and I have really been playing around with this, and maybe therefore like it sounds more complicated than it is to Willy's point. It would be very simple, it would be very short. Like the same as a project proposal for experts is half the size of audit evidence risk response. So this would be extremely short, because what we are doing is just focusing on the proportionality and the relevance. So we're not going to, it won't be an endless long project proposal.
I guess my point still is a project proposal. If we commit to doing project proposals on each one, it requires like this formality to the process. Like, we all agree that you're going to have to do the exercise that you're talking about as part of coming up with a proportional. Like, we'll see how it runs, I guess, is the way I say it. Like, I'm sort of fine with where Willy is. But I also don't think that we need a project proposal on top of a project proposal. Our project proposal was, let's make these things proportionate, and not debate the ICEs again. And how you do it is fine. So like, it's maybe once we see it, it will be fine. But I just don't want things to be complicated and bureaucratic, because the project proposal is, we're making these things proportionate as part of maintenance, and that doesn't exist, and we're just appending actual work to it constantly. I don't know, Amaro, if you remember how the SME, IFRS for SME, or in the improvements project, for example, wasn't that an open project proposal, just like it's all going to be done on an annual basis?
Yeah, no, for SMEs, for instance, it has a 3-year lag. So it can be the case that even within this 3 years, some changes in the IFRSs are already in place and they are not valid for SMEs. So they go through the process again because of the particular users of SME standards, as Hernan mentioned. For the annual improvement, it's as it says, it's only it's once a year, and they take all the changes, very, very simple, and go through a process of approval.
Okay, so what we'll do is the following. We'll go along the lines that this overarching approach with what Willy described. It's not going to be so complicated. When we see it, we may have some further suggestions. When it comes to us, next, be prepared for that. But as long as it's, I think the advice is to keep it as simple as possible. Yep, back to you.
Thank you, Tom. So just have to wait forward for you. So it's in December. We'll have a project proposal for you. And then we can further discuss it. I think it's easier at one point, like just really discuss it when you see the project proposal, because as Willy mentioned, it's a very conceptual discussion, this. And then in next year, we'll start with the development of the exposure draft, which we then hope to get approved in June of next year. And we can kind of test if the thinking that we had time-wise, whether that is working. Also recognizing, of course, that this is the first time we go through all of this with the board, and therefore it takes some extra time. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Tom, any perspectives to PIOP?
Thank you very much. I'm very supportive of the Tom's suggestion that to make the process simple as possible, and at the same time that when you prepare the next paper project proposal, make it and put the concept of this about the due process, because when we come back to the PIOB colleagues, and they have to know that another certification process is coming to the PIOB board. That I would like to make it very clear to them as well.
Okay, great. I feel like we had a little flashback for a little bit from some of the discussions we had in 2020, but when we're in the midst of COVID, of how we run this standard. But good work, and thank you for that. I guess we are at a point that we could have a quick break. I think we'll take a half hour. What we should do is reconvene, not at 11:30, but at 11:20. And then we're gonna have experts in our scope amendments approval, and then we'll go to sustainability. So, okay, thank you, team. Okay, could people start getting seated? Okay, here we are, ready to go down the home stretch. And as you know, we've clearly been here long enough this week that Jamie and Dan have morphed into one. Yes, yeah. They missed each other. So Team Maroon, we're gonna turn it over to you to bring us home on the narrow scope amendments of our expert standard.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom, and the team is very happy to do that. First of all, want to thank the board for your comments and the discussion on Monday. Comments were very helpful. The team took those away and reflected and made the changes in response to those comments that you see now in agenda item 2B.1. Also want to note that we were able to get some input from our IAASB colleagues. We really thank them for that in the midst of their busy board week in Lisbon. But Ken and Cam provided us some comments. Generally, they were in agreement with what we had, but they had a couple of suggestions that the team has already picked up. Jamie will touch on those in just a minute. We also did have some offline comments from a few of the board members, and we thank those of you who did stop by this morning and take advantage of the consultation session that we had. And we appreciate the input and the comments, and we've already taken up or have some ideas for some how to respond to those. But right now, I'm going to turn it over to Jamie. Jamie's going to walk the board very quickly through the changes and some of the project team's thinking in making those changes in response to your comments. So, Jamie.
Thank you, Dan. Just a couple of overarching opening remarks. So several board members did send in some basic minor typo comments, and thank you to the board members that did that. We're not going to walk you through those. Those have been fixed. They were basic typos. You would have seen at the top of paper 2B1, it's shown as markup, but it talks about the fact that we spotted that there were some application material paragraphs that we had added references to, but they were not actually in the paper. So for completeness, to ensure users didn't wonder what those application paragraphs were, they've been added to the paper. They're not shown as markup. There's no changes to them. They're just simply there for completeness of the document. So with that, the first change we want to highlight is paragraph 8F. And we did talk about this one on Monday. So you'll see that we have redrafted 8F to make it sound more like a consideration. We had the comments that it sounded possibly a little bit too definitive. So you'll see that 8F now reads, whether relevant ethical requirements include provisions related to using the work of an expert. And that more aligns it with the drafting that already existed in point E of paragraph 8. And if there's no comments, I'll pause after each one just to make sure there's no comments from the board, but I think that one was pretty much agreed on Monday. So if we then move to paragraph 9A, which was the new requirement, and there's two changes here. The first change you'll see was to add at the beginning of the requirement a linkage back to paragraph 9. So it now says if based on the evaluation in accordance with paragraph 9. And the reason we did that was paragraph 9A, as the board knows, was essentially us making explicit what was already implicit about the evaluation that's required by paragraph 9. So we thought that actually more directly linking 9A with paragraph 9 would help with that emphasis. And the second change was really to address a drafting suggestion to make it a little bit easier to read in terms of how you think about objectivity as distinct from competence and capabilities. So that's just really to improve the readability of that part of the requirement.
Any comment? Yeah.
Okay. So the next change is in paragraph A13A, and this is more just a minor point. So in doing a complete review of the document, we realised there were a few places where we were slightly inconsistent in terms of whether we used the phrase relating to the use of the work of an expert or saying related to using the work of an expert. So we've now aligned that throughout the document.
Okay.
The next change to highlight, and this relates to paragraph A16A. The first change you'll see is we've struck out the cross-reference back to paragraph A13A. We had comments from various board members to suggest that we should just add a new footnote reference to the relevant provisions of the code, which we've now done. A related point here, and this is to Dan's point about the feedback from IAASB, a number of our AM paragraphs talk about using the work of an auditor's expert, and that's deliberate because the ISA covers both internal and external experts. The feedback from IAASB was when we refer to the code only deals with an auditor's external expert. So there are 3 footnotes in the standard, footnotes 3, 5, and 7, where the example text has been updated to say related to the work, using the work of an auditor's external expert, just to make clear that when we're talking about the code, that's limited to an external expert.
Any comments there? Okay.
Okay, so I'll take you now to paragraph A18A, and this is the hanging paragraph. So the original drafting on Monday was attempting to explain which entities the auditor was required to obtain information about relationships which that expert may have with those entities, whether that be the entity subject to audit or a different entity at which the expert was doing its work. So the project team reflected, and actually 2 thoughts became clear. One, where we'd added the addition was actually fundamentally changing the work effort requirement that was required by the ISA, and that was never the intent. So we reflected on that and decided that it's not the role of the ISA to try to explain the very detailed provisions of the code. So we decided that the last sentence that was already there with the appropriate footnote pointing to the code provisions was sufficient, and the code provisions is where you find out which entities the information needs to obtain from. So we don't want to complicate the ISA by trying to do that. So essentially the change is just to strike out the addition that we brought to that first sentence.
Any comment?
Oh. Okay, so we'll move now to the hot 2 paragraphs where we received several comments, A19A and A19B. So the first thing to highlight is you will see that we inserted a new subheading, prohibition on using the work of an auditor's expert. And that is simply to give some additional emphasis about what A19A and B is addressing, distinct from the application material that preceded it. We were asked to look at simplifying A19A and A19B. So hopefully board members can see we've been quite aggressive on the streamlining. And on this one, Dan, if we can move to our the next slide, please. On A19A, we did receive some comments this morning that it could be even clearer than what we had. Now, the only change we're proposing that you can now see on this slide is essentially flipping the sentence around. So it says the exact same thing, but we just make it a more direct statement. I'm not going to read out the slide, but so it basically kind of like tells you that if you use the work of the expert when they don't have the necessary CCO, then that would affect your fulfillment of ethical principles. So it's the exact same as what was there, but flipped around a little bit to be even more direct. And the project team was happy to support that suggestion from the board member this morning. So I will pause there, Tom, because there may be some reaction to that change.
Nancy? One of the things, you probably should read it for the record, because I'm not sure everyone who's observing the meeting will be able to see it easily on their screen. So Jay, why don't you read it for the record?
Yep, certainly. So the proposal for A19A would now read, using the work of an auditor's expert that does not have the necessary competence, capabilities, or objectivity for the auditor's purposes would affect the auditor's fulfillment of fundamental ethical principles such as integrity, objectivity, and professional competence and due care.
Thank you. Nancy?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tim. I think the proposal addressed the concern I was expressing. I think there was some ambiguity in terms of the using it in the middle of the sentence. And now with the current construct, both of those things have to happen at the same time. So it's using the work when you have decided that they actually don't have the CCO. So thank you. I think it addressed my concern. Thank you.
Josephine?
Again, just wanting to thank you for streamlining these two paragraphs much better and very comfortable with the revised wording.
Mara?
Thank you, Tom. I also expressed some concerns about the reading of the paragraph, and I think the proposed revising wording is very much clearer and provide the clarity that we want. Thank you.
Robert?
I like streamlining, so thank you. But I'm not a native English speaker, but in the version from yesterday, it says affects auditors' fulfillment, and here it says would affect auditors' fulfillment. So I don't know if this is a difference. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. So yes, we did receive, and I think Christelle read it in the public discussion on Monday, that the concern with saying affects was implied that the auditor was using the work of the expert, where we're saying that really, if they conclude they don't have the necessary CCO, they should not be. Therefore, we've made it more of a, well, if you were to use the work, it would affect, to avoid any perception that they were just going ahead regardless and using it.
I feel like Isabel is smiling somewhere. She's probably listening. Hi, Isabel. Okay. Okay, so let the record note that people are happy with the revised paragraph A19A that was read out by Jamie.
So if we move to A19B, again, the project team has significantly streamlined this one. The view was, given the prohibition that's now explicit in the ISA, it wasn't necessary to repeat the three-legged element of the IAASB provision directly within the paragraph. So we have simplified it. To Nancy's point, we heard the comments that board members wanted a reference to the inability to determine retained. So you'll see that as part of the revision. And then, as I mentioned, we have updated the footnote to make sure it references the specific paragraph provisions appropriately. I'll pause there, Tom.
Okay. Any comments? Nancy?
Oops. So are we on 19B? So your slide's still on A19A?
No, but it's in the paper itself.
Oh, I see. Okay, so you're not.
They're
I
only
see.
posted changes.
I see.
I think if there were a change from the actual Word document that was circulated last night.
Right. So sidebar conversation, and I quickly updated then when Jamie, you were not in the room. So the reason that the way it read bothered me is because the unable to determine is on a positive assertion. which is like you're trying to determine whether they have CC, and it would be then an and O. That's what was troubling me vis-a-vis the supposition that you're unable to. You've concluded that it doesn't have the CCO, which would then flip it to the or. So that I find the structure was confusing a little bit. So my latest suggestion now, I've given a suggestion yesterday, and then I look at it again after talking to Dan. What I like to propose is to say that to take out some of the words there and take both of them to actually comment on a negative assertion. So if you would bear with me, if the auditor is unable to determine or determines that the expert does not have the necessary competence, capability, or objectivity, then that would work. Because now we're commenting on the same negative assertion, and we're just basically saying that you're unable to determine, and take out that consideration aspect, the whether, then I think that construct would work.
Jamie?
Thank you, Nancy. And yes, you provided your comments this morning, and the project team had a robust discussion about many different ways we could try to redraft this paragraph. And we also reflected on your latest suggestion to Dan earlier this morning. Having looked at the language in the code provision, which does use the word or, so it says if the accountant is unable to determine whether the expert has the necessary competence and capabilities or objectivity. So we felt that, and because we're effectively referencing the code example here, we should stick closely, well, stick exactly to the language of the code. So it does use or. I know you have a view that it should probably say and, but the code does say or, so we felt we should stick with that. And having considered all the different possible variations of language, the project team concluded that what was reflected in the paper overnight was actually the clearest construct in the project team's view.
So the issue is that we're now talking about relevant ethical requirements. We're not specifically drawing from the code. So I think we have the latitude there. Like what you intend to do, I'm totally with it. I'm very happy in terms of the direction you're heading. And I think, if you just remove that as a consideration, if you just cannot determine that it doesn't have, then everything flow. So all you would do would be to remove those four words, right? To determine or determines that, it's the same assertion. I think that works.
So I think even though we refer to relevant ethical requirements, we try as hard as possible to stick to the IAASB code language as much as possible. Let me just get a sense. Is the rest of the board fine with what's been proposed in this language and are comfortable with this? Nancy, I think having thought about both, like, is it a fatal flaw for you to exist as it is?
So I think I defer to the room. If I'm seeing that all my colleagues are comfortable with it, then I'm fine with that. Because I think I'm fully behind the direction that the team is heading, right? So now we're talking about whether it would cause any confusion. And if people were to refer back to the wording of the code, I mean, they do use the or, the whether with the or. So I can see that, not that I'm on side with that, because I worry about the interpretation of, you're looking for individual elements as opposed to the whole thing as a package. But I would go with the group and not take up more time with the board. So I would support the team if the room is comfortable with that.
Anna?
So I'm happy to nitpick as well. And it's not a fatal flaw. But A19B in the way it's constructed tripped me up a little bit, because it starts with may also prohibit. And this is application material in respect of a requirement that says, well, if you cannot determine, you cannot use it. So here we articulate, okay, also relevant ethical requirements may also or you may also, no, I'm getting tripped up in my own words, sorry. So this also refers to the circumstance of not using an external expert. And here the case is, okay, if you're not able to determine, then you cannot use it. But then the sentence follows on with or determine, so that you cannot use it. So it's a doubling up of what's already in the requirement. I know it's in the code, it's factually correct. So I just happy to contribute to the nitpicking, but that probably tells you how comfortable I am with where we are.
I have a suggestion. He needs his TA to whisper in his ear right now again.
I can't see my TA, it's not at the right spot, yeah.
I think people are generally comfortable with how it's drafted, and sticking to the code, the way the code is written, probably makes some sense. And I'm sure his TA would whisper that to him. Okay.
So that actually concludes the changes to 620, Tom, and there are no other unique changes to the other standards. So what we just described has just been flowed through the other relevant standards. So if the board's comfortable with 620, we should be able to presume the board's comfortable with the other standards as well.
But not to presume for the public record, if anyone would like to raise a comment on or question on other standards. Wendy?
Just a question on 2400 and the decision not to put in the definition of the practitioner's expert. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. So I think it was Neil that raised that question on Monday, and I think we gave the explanation that the definition is essentially baked into the requirement of 2400. It has never existed when they wrote 2400, so we felt that because it was in the requirement, it was okay, and it also was not in our scope to bring that in.
Okay, comfortable with that? Anything else you want to add before we go to the formalities? Okay, before we get to the formalities, I just want to see Tom, on behalf of the PIOB, any considerations before we consider voting on the revisions? Nothing? Okay, thank you. So, Dan, I go to you to address relevant due process considerations from the projects team perspective.
Yes, thank you, Tom. The project team's due process considerations in coordination with the program and senior director are included in section 1 of agenda item 2E, which was posted publicly on the IAASB's meetings webpage on September 5th. And in the project team's view, the significant matters it has identified as a result of the deliberations since the beginning of this project, including the substantial matters raised by respondents to the ED, have been reflected in the public agenda materials presented to the IAASB at its meetings. And in the project team's view, there are no significant matters discussed in the course of this project that have not been brought to the IAASB's attention. Then I'd also note that as explained in paragraph 4 of agenda item 2E, the project team does not believe that further consultation, for example, a public forum or roundtable consultation paper or conducting a field test, is warranted before finalizing the expert's narrow scope amendments. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you, Dan. I'm going to turn it over to Billy.
Thank you, Tom. And so in the same agenda paper 2E, section 2 addresses or sets out the status of due process that was followed up to the September 2025 meeting, and is also the due process is also reflected in the discussions that we've had, in the discussions that the board had during this meeting in terms of its deliberations about the feedback received on the ED, the project team's views and recommendations, as well as further changes that the board suggested to the narrow scope amendments and the rationale for those changes. So in that context, I can confirm to the IAASB that up to and during the September 2025 IAASB meeting, the proposed experts' narrow scope amendments have been developed in accordance with the IAASB's due process. Due process has been followed effectively and with proper regard to the public interest, including adherence to the requirements of the public interest framework. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Billy. Okay. Does anyone have any objections to vote on the narrow scope amendments now contained in agenda item 2-B.1 as amended with the one paragraph that was shown on the slide earlier? Okay, so we're clear on what needs to be done here. We're gonna get a vote. I'm gonna go straight to those who are seeking to approve by a show of hands. Who votes to approve the experts narrow scope amendment? Let the record show that we have all 16 votes of the board, which is great. It means I get to skip what I was told is the next step potentially about providing reasons for abstentions or dissents. So Dan, I turn it over to you on whether the project team thinks we need to re-expose this issue after we field test.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Back to agenda item 2E again, and section 1 includes the project team's analysis of whether the narrow scope amendments need to be re-exposed. I would draw your attention to paragraph 6, which highlights the relevant considerations of the need for re-exposure of an approved pronouncement as set out in the integrated due process and public interest framework operating procedures. And also paragraph 7, which summarizes the project team's response to significant matters raised by respondents to the exposure draft in relation to ISO 620, ISRE 2400 revised, ISAE 3000 revised, and ISRS 4400 revised. And then also as noted in paragraph 8 of agenda item 2E, the project team is of the view that the narrow scope amendments do not warrant re-exposure. Paragraphs 9 and 10 address other matters that the project team considered in reaching that view. And the program and senior director, in consultation with the chair, concurs with the project team. Back to you, Tom.
Okay, now we actually have to ask the board, does anyone feel the need for re-exposure of this narrow scope amendment? Okay, I assume by that, unless I see a dissent, that everyone believes there's no need for it. So therefore, we are going to publish it without re-exposure. Vili, could you reconfirm the effective date of the amendments, please?
Yeah, Tom, and the board will remember we discussed this in plenary session on Monday. So I think everybody was in agreement then. So these narrow scope amendments will be effective as of December 2026.
Anything else? Absolutely. Oh, I forgot to flip this over. There it is. I printed on both sides of the paper. Day 4. Okay, Dan, can you come back to address the basis for conclusions?
Yep, thank you, Tom. Refer the board to section 3 of agenda item 2E. That sets out the background relating the requirement to present the board with a draft of the basis for conclusions. That has been done in the appendix to agenda item 2E. And just to draw your attention to a couple of things, paragraph 16 lays out the sources for the development of the basis for conclusions. The draft is essentially complete. With the exception of the IAASB decisions, we didn't want to be presumptuous in drafting the that part of the basis for conclusions until the IAASB had fully discussed and approved the narrow scope amendments. So as noted in the appendix, we will now complete that section or those sections of the basis for conclusions drawn from the material you saw in the board agenda papers this week, modified as necessary to reflect the input and the discussions of the board during the two plenary sessions this week. The only question is whether any board member wishes to raise on the public record now any significant matters that the project team might need to consider in finalizing the draft basis for conclusions.
Okay, I see no hands raised. Sorry about missing that. But it leads us to this most important point, is to congratulate the team, Jamie, Kazuko, Dan, for your work. Great job with getting this through. Kazuko, we'll get you a sweater that matches them next time as your reward. Tom, I gotta just ask if you have any final observations on the experts project.
No. I'm very satisfied. Thank you.
Thank you. So Billy, lead us home. Tell us the next steps.
Okay, so the clean version of agenda item B2, we'll probably make it B.2, which will be the approved text with the amendment that was shown on screen. That will, as always, be available on our website immediately after the meeting. So if stakeholders want to look at that. Obviously, we also still have to do a submission to the PIOB for the certification process. The PIOB does not have a meeting in December. Your meeting, Tom, as I understand from Pavel and Maria, is in January. So this will go to the January meeting of the PIOB and will then be published soon after that meeting.
But I urge stakeholders who are following this to utilize the draft that's on the website to give maximum time for implementation. Okay, great job, team. Again, thank you. Okay, last but certainly not least, we're going to turn to sustainability assurance and get an update on adoption and implementation efforts. Claire, we'll give you a moment to get your presentation up. And if the team wants to stay at the table, feel free to, but if you don't, feel free to.
Jamie needs to do some whispering.
Clearly.
I can start talking while the slides are being put up. Michelle, are they on their way?
Okay,
yes, they're on their way. So we'll get started. So we're delighted to be in the graveyard shift, and we'll try our very best to entertain you so everyone doesn't fall asleep. So Kazuko and I will be presenting to you to give you an update on adoption and implementation of IAASB 5000. And we've got Dan here as well, who's been closely involved in the project from the beginning. And so he is here as well to answer or respond to comments and questions when we have our discussion. So there's been a lot of developments globally in sustainability reporting and assurance since we last discussed this topic in March. Whilst we're going to share what we are seeing and how we're responding, really the purpose of this session is to hear from you, the board, as to what the insights that you're seeing on sustainability reporting and assurance developments in your regions and globally, progress in adoption of IAASB 5000, any implementation questions or challenges you've been encountering that we might not have heard about yet, and whether there's implementation or in fact into adoption resources that you think are needed to address those issues or other issues. And, ultimately, whether the resources that we're going to step through that we've got planned are sufficient and appropriate, or whether we need something else or different priorities. So So to set up this discussion, Kazuko and I will outline IAASB's objectives for adoption and implementation of 5,000 and the progress we've made so far. I'll start with the adoption of 5,000 and how we're planning to encourage that adoption. Then I'll pass to Kazuko to talk about implementation. And finally, we will open up to the discussion. This is always the part that's tricky, getting the click. Oh, it worked. Okay. So regarding adoption, our objective is to encourage adoption of 5,000 as the global baseline for sustainability assurance. Now that's for both mandatory and voluntary assurance engagements on sustainability information reported. Doesn't matter, which direction jurisdictions are going with. 5,000 is what we are encouraging to be used. Our messaging to stakeholders has been that high quality assurance on sustainability is a key element in a strong sustainability reporting ecosystem. So we see there being three core elements: a suitable framework, such as GRI, IAASB standards or ESRS standards, a robust assurance provided by ISSA 5000, coupled with ethical requirements, the IASB code, or something at least as demanding. And we would expect that to be, in time at least, supported by effective oversight. So from jurisdiction regulators or professional bodies who require, monitor and enforce compliant application of all of that whole set of standards for that robust ecosystem. So what we've been communicating to stakeholders is that assurance enhances trust and confidence of users in the sustainability information reported. And using 5,000 establishes that global baseline that I just mentioned for robust and reliable sustainability assurance, promotes consistency across engagements and assures a level playing field for all assurance practitioners. It reduces regulatory fragmentation and promotes interoperability and comparability. So it's really that consistency and comparability that is really key, and that reduces, regulatory burden, and it reduces confusion and inconsistency, and is harder for users if it's not applied consistently. Next slide, please. So how are we doing this? How are we encouraging adoption? So really initially, that's mainly focused on outreach. So directly with stakeholders and through presenting at outreach events. So we've been involved in a whole range of those activities. Tom obviously leads a lot of that work with a broad range of stakeholders across the globe. And I know he mentioned earlier in the week all the different parts of the globe that he's been in, but I'll give you a couple of examples of things that also not only Tom, but also our Sustainability Assurance Working Group and staff have been involved with since March. So we was involved closely in the CSRD Accountancy Europe Practice Forum. Josephine represents us on the World Business Council for Sustainable Development development group, and so she is attending those meetings and communicating directly with key stakeholders. In Latin America, Tom attended the CRECER conference in Peru, Forum of Firms, and also coming up is pre-COP UN Trade and Development event, as well as the Mexican IFAC Connect event. Africa, Neil attended the African Congress of Accountants. Tom was down recently there in Africa for IFAC Connect and connecting with a whole lot of stakeholders there. And we've got the upcoming IFAC Connect MENA in Saudi Arabia, covering the Middle East. In Asia, Mikiko's been doing a lot in Japan, and we've also had a number of outreach, for example, with the Sustainable Stock Exchange, and also we've got IFAC Connect Asia coming up later in the year. So that just touching on the kinds of events and activity that's happening to keep in touch with stakeholders around adoption. And we've also got regular liaison happening with the IAASB, and we've been learning from them as to what's been working for the IAASB in their adoption and implementation journey, and that's been really, really helpful to inform us and to look at working out what resources we will develop and how we should be contacting stakeholders and moving forward. We also meet regularly with IFAC to leverage their resources and to work with them on our outreach events, as well as collaborating with IAASB. For example, Kazuko will talk about this, but joint FAQs, and also just aligning our thoughts about how to coordinate with stakeholders. And we present very regularly with our IAASB colleagues at events. So we hope that this outreach will help raise awareness of the scope and applicability of 5,000 and what it can provide, and give insights on the adoption issues and challenges. And we certainly get, feedback from those events to help us identify suitable resources. So at the main resource that you'll see published at the moment is a snapshot of adoption, which is on our website. And I'll come into more detail in just a moment. Oh, okay, we can go there now. No, that's fine, that's fine. So on our website, we have focused on the jurisdictional standard setters and those 22 jurisdictions that are represented by the jurisdictional standard setters. And so you'll see that list on our website. And this snapshot here that we're presenting is but we are also monitoring as many other jurisdictions across the globe as we can, and we're building on that. And this snapshot here is of 33 jurisdictions and showing an idea of where things are moving around the globe, and all different continents are looking at and moving forward with adoption of 5,000. I think these numbers actually do belie the extent of the adoption globally, the progress towards adoption globally. So we are being cautious about what we are publishing on our website because we want to verify that and be absolutely 100% sure that it is correct, but we plan to build on that every quarter. So in December, we will update and we'll add many of these jurisdictions that are represented on this bigger snapshot that you have in front of you at the moment.
Could you say why this is limited? Because remember, if you look at the footnote here, we haven't done a full survey of the landscape here. And so I wonder whether amongst this group of people at the table, they have a network that extends beyond the jurisdictional standard setters, that we could have like an ongoing spreadsheet that's available to people.
Yeah, I can respond to that to start with, and then of course welcome the board's comments. So that's exactly what we've been looking at, Tom. And so I have been in discussions with some of you already about supporting us in that way. So we do have a number of bodies that are regional bodies that will definitely be able to feed in and give us support in that way, Tom. So yeah, I don't know if you want to comment, for example. I'm looking at you, Hernan. You're welcome to comment if you like on what we discussed, for example. So I have been looking at identifying those bodies around the globe.
Thank you, Claire. Well, in Latin America, from GLASS, we are working on obtaining information about the adoption process in different countries. Yesterday, Amaro explained the progress is in Brazil, but other countries are working on the process adoption. For example, Argentina is working on. We expect to finalize adoption by the end of September this month. Costa Rica is fully adopted, yes, the standard. I understand that Colombia is working on the adoption process also. And Venezuela and Peru expressed that they are waiting for the Spanish version of the standard to start their process in adopting the standard. The other countries being part of GLAS or CLANIF are working on, but we don't have a specific information. We're gathering information, and once we have all this information, and go back to Claire for up to date this work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Hernan. And we do have, I don't want to name them now because we need to work with the other bodies that we've identified, but we also really welcome any feedback that any of the other board members have, or any monitoring that you're doing or your firms are doing or your organisations are doing, or recommendations of bodies that we should be helping us to track. So we heard from IAASB and we've had close discussions with them about the monitoring of adoption, and we're using a lot of their information to help lead us to the verification of the adoption. So that's been very helpful. But you heard from them, it is very time consuming to actually bottom out exactly what's happening in each jurisdiction. So that's why we've decided to step by step. We add as much as we can each quarter, make sure that we've updated those that we already have on our website and move forward that way, but very much looking for that collaboration with other bodies. I wanted to welcome, oh, hang on, Nancy.
Just a question, Claire. We had the presentation from David yesterday, I guess it was. To what extent are you getting information from him and his research? I mean, mind you, his report was somewhat dated, but I would imagine that collection of information would not be static. It would be perhaps ongoing. So to what extent is it consistent with what he's seeing? And are there ways that we can leverage off as he collects information along the way?
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. So we're working closely with IFAC. We do find that time lag isn't generally, it's very, very helpful, obviously, the research David does and also the work that IFAC does with their member bodies. But we are trying to look as real time as we can in this snapshot to be most useful. So we are tapped in to IFAC's. IFAC do member surveys to gather adoption information, and we are tapped into that any information that we can get through those survey responses. But they do come at all different times of the year, so we're having to move faster than often than that information is available.
Should we continue? Oh, yeah.
Very quickly, Claire. So we're really presenting information at a very high level, right? And if it's possible to get, members to confirm the status, because basically you're sort of saying, are we moving? Is it in progress and all of that? That should not be difficult for you to try to confirm. If you get to more granular information, then it may or may not be that easy for people to collect that information for you. It's just a thought.
Yeah, so you'll see on our website the information that we've been able to verify from the jurisdictional standard setters. As I say, we want to be 100% sure that what we're presenting is accurate. And obviously there's language barriers sometimes with the information that we're looking at. So definitely for December, we are extending. So I haven't included the names of these jurisdictions on here because that would kind of undermine my comment that we need to verify it. I mean, I'm very, very confident in what you see on screen, but I'm not listing the names because we need to make sure we've got all our ducks in a row. So definitely. And look, we are presenting that at a fairly high level, just in these categories: adopted, in progress, or under consideration. So so appreciate the input, and we're definitely going to keep tabs on that. So yeah, thanks, Nancy. Okay. So overall, what we're seeing, and again, we'll be interested in your reflections in a moment, is that the momentum. You will see from this that there is some momentum in the what I'll say the global north, or the northern hemisphere. However, we do know, and all of you are aware, there is a move towards deregulation and simplification, mostly in the northern hemisphere. So we are seeing some level of slowdown, but we're also seeing the focus moving more towards the adoption for voluntary sustainability reporting and assurance. So it's not gone. It's just being made available for voluntary use. And perhaps mandatory reporting not being, and assurance not being so much the focus. However, in the Global South, we are seeing very strong momentum building rapidly towards adoption of ISSA 5000, often coupled with adoption of IFRS S1 and S2 or local equivalent. So, yeah. So now, sorry, actually, before I hand over to Kazuko, I did want to mention one more thing, which is we are also looking at resources for adoption, a fact sheet, but we are focusing on implementation resources right now, a fact sheet for adoption. And we are also looking at IAASB. We've been talking to IAASB about a collaborative project on developing a roadmap for adoption. And that very much is building off and informed by the IAASB's roadmap toolkit that they have developed for their stakeholders. So I just wanted to flag that they are future resources that the Sustainability Assurance Implementation Working Group is working with us, and we'll be working through what that will look like. So now I'll hand to Kazuko to talk about implementation.
Okay. So now moving on to implementation. The key messages that since we presented to you last in March hasn't really changed. IAASB is continued to be committed to supporting effective and consistent implementation of ISSA 5000. So with that, I'll move on to the next slide. This slide, I want to highlight what we have published since we last presented to you in March. So we had 2 FAQs, and one was developed jointly with IAASB. It's addressing matters relevant to the application of both ISSA 5000 and ISA. And the other FAQ addresses the applicability of ISSA 5000, ISA 3000 revised, and ISA 3410 for sustainability assurance engagement after the effective date of ISSA 5000. So those are the 2 FAQs that we developed. And we also had extracts from ISSA 5000 for limited assurance material and separately for reasonable assurance material. The extracts were prepared in response to requests from certain stakeholders to have the ability to separately view the material relevant to limited assurance engagements and reasonable assurance engagements. Those materials are clearly noted that reading the extract is not a substitute for reading ISSA 5000. I also want to note that these FAQs and extracts, they were developed to also serve to assist in adoption decisions and not just for implementations. We also opened a registration for global webinars. The webinars are 3 sessions, and each webinar will take place twice to accommodate different time zones and global audience. At this morning, we have more than 1,000 registrations for each of the sessions. All of these materials can be accessed through the Sustainability Assurance Focus page. Moving on to the next slide. So this slide depicts the mechanism we have to identify and address implementation questions or matters, and what we plan to publish in the near future to support implementation. The mechanism hasn't changed since we last presented, except at the time, the establishment of ISSA 5000 Technical Implementation Contact Group was in progress. And now we have that group established, and we had 2 meetings with the group. A quick recap on what this group is. ISSA 5000 Technical Implementation Contact Group is chaired by Josephine, and this group provides us with insight and feedback about technical issues regarding ISSA 5000 implementation and how implementation matters may be addressed. In Q3 and Q4 this year, our focus on implementation materials will be the technical webinars I just mentioned about the registration in the previous slide. and the webinars will be held in October. We also plan to publish illustrative assurance reports, which will include 5 unmodified and 3 modified illustrative assurance reports. And we also plan to publish an FAQ on materiality. With that, please let me hand it to
Josephine.
Thank you very much. And of course, I know this, so I'm not commenting on this particularly. One thing that was fed back to me, though, is our landing page is very difficult to find. And so maybe we need to have a chat with Megan and see if we can actually put a link to the actual landing page itself on our website. You end up having to navigate various different aspects. And even if you Google it, you can't find it. So I think it's worthwhile, because I think a lot of people don't realize there's so much material out there they can access. And when in the UK we exposed 5,000, a lot of comments that came back were that we could really use some guidance, maybe an implementation guide, and so I was quite shocked that people, but it could just be it's not really obvious and in their faces. So yeah, if we could do something, it's more of a practical point. Thank you.
Thank you, Josephine.
It is in the top right-hand corner of the page, so maybe we can make it stand out, but it says explore resources. If you go to our...
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Is this just...
No, it's been here for a while.
Oh, sorry.
But
Anyway.
anyway,
Can I take
Josephine,
it back?
No, don't take it back. That's absolutely fine, because we can have a look with you as to what, what might be helpful, or how, because things can get a bit lost when there's a lot of resources. So, yeah. Oh, that's all right.
I thought you were an auditor. Where's the professional skepticism?
Yeah, no corroboration.
Yeah.
Okay, so we just, before we have our discussion, if we can move to the next slide, thanks, Kazuko. We just want to give you a little bit of a flavour, not in too much detail, about what we're hearing from all these sources that Kazuko just mentioned, and that's informing our support materials. So these are the areas that we're seeing, and we have been gathering all of the questions and issues from our working group, from our technical implementation contact group, from things we're hearing from you, from your technical advisors, from the jurisdictional standard setters, and other outreach meetings where we're hearing comments. We're gathering that all in a database and tracking, and whether they're appropriate for us to address, and if so, how we're going to address those. And some of those we have already addressed. Many of those we're going to tackle in the webinars that are coming up, and then we'll see what the feedback is like, what additional questions we get, and we're expecting we'll need to back that up with some further FAQs down the track. Some of it will obviously be addressed. So, for example, through the other materials like the illustrative reports, FAQs on materiality that we're doing. So, for example, the relevant ethical requirements, some have already been addressed with our joint FAQs with IAASB, but we do need to explain more about that in our webinars. Materiality has been really an issue that stakeholders have been really grappling with. And so narrow scope engagements has been quite a thing that we've been talking about to stakeholders, as well as aggregating disparate disclosures. So we will cover that in our webinars, but we'll also follow up with our materiality FAQs. And we're deliberately going to issue those a few weeks after the webinars so that we're really cognizant of all the challenges, that people are finding. Difference between limited and reasonable assurance. Obviously, that's something we worked really hard in the standard to make super clear. But, again, reiterating some of those points, we will certainly be doing that in those webinars. Evidence from the value chain, estimates and forward-looking information, the things that we knew all along are challenging areas to actually do in practice. The connectivity with the financial statement auditor, how much they can use the work if they're within the same firm, or otherwise how they can communicate with the auditor of the entity. and we'll be setting out key differences between 5,000 and 3,000 in the webinars. And finally, with the assurance report, there'll be a lot of questions answered through those illustrative reports that are very close to being published. So that will help answer a lot of questions that we're getting in that regard. We're not finding anything broken, but just areas where people want us to point to and draw out what in a lot of cases is already there. So now, Tom, move over to discussion with the board on these 2 questions.
I guess the one point is you're getting feedback about the demand. There's the demand for guidance is insatiable, probably. How, or maybe Josephine, this is a question for you. How do we sort of set a threshold of when we actually do something and when we don't? Because I guess that obviously we want to be both as helpful as possible, but not create another set of literature that becomes de facto authoritative guidance. So like, how are you helping to manage all these requests?
Well, at the moment, I mean, and Claire, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel that what we're managing it pretty well at this stage, and actually having the different groups support us is helpful too. The IAASB's implementation support group is incredibly helpful, and so far it is manageable. It's and the webinars, for example, are really helpful because we can deal with some of these issues that are coming up at those webinars. Sometimes what we do think sometimes that some of the questions that are coming through might be more about methodology. And so in those circumstances, we'll say, well, that's not really what we're here to do. We're here to support you if you're worried about interpretation of the standards. So when something hits sort of that side of the bar, then we tend not to bring it up to do an FAQ or whatever it is. And so at the moment, that's really the only thing I can say, that we tend to say no. But I think that would be Claire.
Yeah, and I think, very much, asking the Sustainability Assurance Implementation Working Group, their views on priorities and what they're, whether we get these issues and whether that they're important or not. Some, we think, well, no, as you say, that's methodology, or no, that's outside of our remit. But quite a lot of at this stage, we've got the webinars that we can use as a conduit for sharing and highlighting what's in the standard, what's in the implementation guide, or what the approach should be, then that's going to be the question will be increasingly necessary, though, Tom, as we go forward, to say, well, hang on, is enough enough? Have we actually done enough? And now it's time for the jurisdictions to just take that on, and we're hoping the resources that we're laying the foundation for their work in education and capacity building at the jurisdictional level.
Bill?
Just Australia was one of the early adopters of climate reporting and assurance. And having said that, we haven't had, your page before that, which was where clarification and guidance is needed, is definitely, the questions are there. But as far as the rest of the material, we haven't been finding a lot of questions coming into us. I think it's just, everyone's getting prepared. And I think that we'll see more as we get closer to the reporting period being at the end of this year. But at this stage, not too much.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Cliff, for the update. I think just where we are in the cycle, you can naturally understand that it might be methodology related to questions, because you would imagine that the standard's released and everyone's building methodologies. And the actual application of the standard is yet to come, the effective date isn't there, etc. So that's just the natural course of where it is. And as everyone's grappling with what does this mean, how do we interpret it, what would you apply, you're going to need to find that balance between providing further guidance and actually now going into the realm of interpretation that would be methodology orientated. So I haven't heard anyone apply the standard yet. They haven't delivered an engagement of it, but loads of discussions, debates. What does this mean? What were they thinking? How's this different from 3000, which is still at a theoretical level, building methodologies and workflows and systems, etc.
I guess my point is like to signal that we're going to be helpful, but it's going to be restrained helpfulness. Because there is at least clearly at some point that we don't want to stray into methodology writing for people. And it's an art rather than a science of where we stop, but I do think we have to be careful here. Wendy?
So excellent presentation, thank you. My perception is that we're doing what we planned. And that's why I wasn't quite worried yet that we were, grabbing onto things that just seemed to be questions popping in. So I imagine when it gets to the point that you get feedback that was either unanticipated or is overwhelmingly suggested we might need to alter our plan, then it'll be discussed with the group that you're working with, the reference groups or wherever you're going to get feedback. But I kind of saw this as an update and also what you had talked about at previous meetings, what you were planning to do with the webinars and the implementation guidance and all of that.
Except that last slides was about feedback we're getting, and like some of it will be taken by update, and some will add guidance. And my whole point is we just have to have a mechanism for that, right?
Yes. I mean, I just saw this as informative. I didn't really see it as starting to do something new. And that you would probably tell us.
Bill?
Just to go back over, the previous slide had matters which the questions come up, but we can be careful. It's not implementation material we're after more standards around those areas. I mean, take materiality. I'm not sure you can go much further without really having it have the authority of a standard. So that's where it gets a bit difficult to go further.
Just responding and reflecting on that, not so much your point, Bill, sorry, more on Wendy and Tom's point. To my mind, I probably didn't articulate this before, that the threshold is really, it comes from our objective, and our objective with implementation is that consistency and comparability. And so what some of the things we're seeing is, I think, what we would think as being a misunderstanding or a misinterpretation in some cases of what the standard is saying, or what the guidance is supporting the standard is saying. And they're the areas that we really feel are important to iron out, because we are seeing the possibilities of divergent practice. And so I think that's at that global, I think we do have a role in that. I think if we can articulate that threshold, Tom, to your point, that this, where it's for global consistency, it's important we sort of state what 5000 is saying, and to dispense with that uncertainty or different interpretation. And there are quite a few issues coming up where that's where we believe they are landing. So if we stay silent on those, it'd be problematic, but definitely not wanting to move into methodology. And I think once we get through this year's plan for the implementation materials in particular, the next step is other FAQs, and that's where we don't want to move into other FAQs unless they are really important for that consistency. Otherwise, we might, as you say, Tom, be starting to stray into areas that's not really necessary for us to weigh into. Yeah, okay. I hope that helps.
I think we had a good discussion there. Any other responses to the questions on screen? Akiko?
Yes, thank you. Yes, actually, yes, in terms of implementation, I think the investor's view is really the key for the 5000 and also the assurance itself. And yeah, so, and that's very important to maybe for our standard, practically, maybe what I hear from stakeholder is there are already different views on what is important to users. And so that is what I asked to IAASB Sue on Monday. And as she said, there is no quick fix on this point, I believe, because investors are very diverse, and then maybe I don't know, my practitioners, preparers, they interact with one investors, and this person said this is not important, but this is not for all the investors. So yeah, so this is very difficult point, but and also this is not what our board only can solve. That is what I'm feeling. So we need to collaborate with others, but I think it's worth just recognizing this can be an implementation issue of 5,000. And as Claire presented, consistency and comparability are key objective of 5,000. So this is can be a this is very important topic because the importance for user, this is what we set as a standard, but this might be diverse. So how people can practically implement that, so that can be an issue. And this might be one of the reasons why we have a massive demand for guidance, as Tom said, so from people. And also, what I'm thinking is, of course, we already provided a lot of guidance as we discussed, and I hope it helps. But another way might exist. So maybe because as I said, investors' view is very dynamic, and it may be changing next year, and also diverse. So some people don't need any sustainability information, but others need very very much. So maybe it's difficult to express everything in a guidance or written document. So for us, it may be one way to facilitate stakeholders to communicate investors or to get investors' view, maybe to create such kind of environment, and they can get investors' view maybe automatically in each jurisdiction, each area, etc. So that might be one way, but I think this is very difficult. But that is one very big point for both practitioners and preparers already wondering. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I think no one's. Show you.
Thank you, Tom. Just want to take this opportunity to share some information. And first, I would like to say it's a very good presentation and very informative. In China, some of you, I think Claire, your team is probably in contact with our JSS. You probably know we have just closed the comment period on the draft of equivalent standards to IASA 5000. And actually, it's very interesting that I think the top what you are hearing from implementation. I think that the first four are also we are hearing from the comments on the exposure draft of the China standards, because stakeholders are asking questions about non-practitioners, or how do you interpret it as demanded as ISPA code or ISKIM 1, and also materiality and the difference between limited and reasonable assurance and the evidence. So I think it will be very helpful if there will be further guidance or FAQs developed in this regard. For my territories, and also in my territory, there is currently a pilot run of implementation. Even if we only have an exposure draft, we are doing a pilot run of 40 entities with their auditors to actually perform sustainability assurance for December 2025 year-end reporting. And those entities participate in that pilot run, including listed companies, financial institutions, and some big SOEs. So I'm not sure whether you have any contact in that regard. I think it will be interesting to watch on what's coming out of that, because it's not only about the assurance, but also the sustainability reporting implementation. For your information, yeah. So yeah, and thank you again.
Okay. Great. I see no other 10 cards up. One thing to emphasize, it was stated, but also woven throughout is the joint efforts that we're doing with IAASB. I raised this again just because it's been a focus at the PIOB. Lots of coordination happening between the two boards in terms of implementation support. Claire, any final comments that you would like to raise?
Just to say that I really appreciate the input and the insights, and Makiko identified one of the most difficult challenges I think that's faced in this space. But and I have been, we have got some information from the JSS in China, which has been really helpful. But also welcome you and any of you to let us know at any time, to fire off an email if something comes up that you think we should be aware of, because it is difficult to keep track of all the things that are happening globally in this space, because it's moving so quickly. So really appreciate the ongoing input and support. Thank you.
Okay. Before we close this topic, Tom, any perspectives from the PIOB on this?
No, I'm very satisfied, especially you mentioned about the coordination between the IAASB, so it's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that brings us to the close of our official business. Well done, Claire, Kazuko, Dan. Appreciate your updates and your continued work on our 5,000 implementation. Makiko, did you want to come in one more time?
Yeah, sorry. Yes, can I make one comment on adoption? Because I make a comment on implementation.
Sure.
Sorry, before closing. Yes, actually, yes, I think it's really amazing the team collaborate with JSS and also IFAC, and you learned a lot from IAASB, and I am a very new member as a standard setting board, and I didn't know how difficult and to get the information from each jurisdiction, but it's very good progress, I believe. Yes, but the on the information in about the adoption, it's very good because we can share, okay, this is the status of each jurisdiction, so it's very helpful. But I think there is two parts. Some countries are in progress, and some countries are maybe in consideration or under consideration, I believe. But what is the difference? That is a little maybe confusing. And also another thing is maybe some more context is very helpful. For example, as Helena said, in some country, this 5,000 is under translation. So that is because it's in progress and has not been adopted. Or is there any other issue? That's why they cannot adopt at this moment. So that is very helpful. If we open that information on the website or not, that is what we need to confirm with jurisdiction, but to identify the issue globally, that is very helpful. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you.
It's all, yeah.
Thank you, Makiko. Okay, so there's helpful advice. So we're gonna bring the meeting to a close, celebrate the 150th. It was a 150th anniversary gift today. We published the new handbook yesterday. So that's now available on our website. We are not entertaining any comments as it relates to the electronic handbook. Just no comments on the electronic handbook. The printed and PDF one is available now. The draft minute. the draft minutes for this meeting will be available soon enough, and we'll push for approval at the December 2025 meeting. If you were wondering, we will not utilize the video call on October 29th. So that means the next time we'll meet as a full board will be December 8th to December 11th in New York. We will provide you the full details in due course. We'll probably post papers beginning November 17th and be posted all by November 21st. Before I finish up, it seems like, Bill, your TED card's up. Do you want to come in?
Just checking that this is the closure of the public meeting, but we still have some private agenda to cover.
Not that I know of, but we can. We'll close this public session and then we'll have an opportunity in private session to raise anything else. Okay, so yes, we're moving towards the end of the public session. First of all, huge thanks to the whole team that makes this all possible. Thank you to everyone from the technical team to the support staff to the IFAC team here that makes this meeting run smoothly. Want to thank the TAs for all their help in both in the paper development, but also in the ear whispering functions of this meeting that keeping us all in line. And obviously the board members for all your time and efforts on our behalf. Thank you, Tom, for coming here at your own expense. It's great to have you here in person. I don't know if you have any final reflections you want to say before we close.
Thank you very much, Chair. I also would like to thank the board and the staff for the hard work of preparing for this an intense week, and then congratulate the board and staff on the successful approval of the expert project. I was really impressed by the strong and steady progress in implementing the staff-driven model, which was supported by the extensive research and outreach by the staff, and also by the commitment of all board members to seek common ground in the spirit of public interest. I would like to convey this observation to the next PIOB meeting. Again, I would like to thank the chair and the board for giving me the privilege to attend this landmark meeting in person. And I'm confident that next December meeting will be just as successful as this one. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind thoughts, Tom. I want to thank all of our observers in the room, but also on YouTube for keeping your close attention and following us and inputting into our standards. It's one of the things that distinguish some of the independent standard setting community is how important it is that we have people engaged with our standard setting development. So I'm going to bring the meeting to close right now. Thank you again. Great meeting. And Bill, there is one thing that we could talk about in executive if you'd like afterwards, but I know there was one thing we didn't finish on in terms of the executive session earlier. Thank you.